Ambassador Lorenzo Llewellyn Witherspoon, former Liberian diplomat. Professor Winston Moore, Deputy Principal, the University of the West Indies, Cavell campus. Distinguished speakers, deans and heads of departments, the UWI Cavell campus, members of the university community, members of the Liberian delegation, and participants in the Sankofa pilgrimage to Barbados, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Cleve Scott. I am a lecturer in history in the Department of History at the Cavell campus of the University of the West Indies. I also wish to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Marshall Cadell, Minister of Industry, Innovation and Technology, who has graciously blessed us with her presence. I wish to begin this morning's proceedings by inviting the Deputy Principal, Professor Winston Moore, to bring you warm greetings on behalf of the university community. Please welcome Professor Moore.
Dr. Cleve Scott, lecturer in history, Department of History and Philosophy. The Honorable Marshall Cadell, Minister of Industry, Innovation, Science and Technology. Ambassador Lorenzo Witherspoon, former Liberian diplomat. Distinguished speakers, deans and heads of departments of the UWI Cavell campus, members of the university community, my brothers and sisters of the Liberian delegation, participating in the Sankofa pilgrimage to Barbados, especially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Clive Landis, I wish to extend our sincerest welcome to University of the West Indies Cavell campus, and by extension, the beautiful island of Barbados. You know, we like to call our campus the beautiful campus by the sea. And I've been at the campus for 17 years, and I've never had lunch by the sea as yet. But I think since you guys are here, I might probably do that today. I'll have my own pilgrimage. But it is an excellent campus. If you visit our Golden Stool, you can see the views of Barbados from the Golden Stool, and I encourage you to make that pilgrimage to the Golden Stool today as well. Unfortunately, the principal was unable to be here today at this momentous event due to a conflicting engagement, but please note he extends his sincere greetings and wishes to everyone for great success during their pilgrimage. In the past few weeks, there has been a growing excitement surrounding the Sankofa pilgrimage to Barbados. It's akin to anticipating the visit of a very famous relative. And in many respects, that is indeed the case. 159 years ago, 50 families made the decision to return to the African continent following the end of the horrendous era of slavery. Those who stayed continue to navigate the socio-economic political climate, leading to the existence of many of us here today. The descendants of both groups have navigated many hardships. Whether it was civil war, political warfare, campaigning for equal rights, or even rebuilding societies, we have succeeded and thrived independently, but we are still connected by our ancestry. As we use this period to connect, I wish to encourage you to think of Barbados as your home. We have a lot to offer. Not just our beautiful beaches, but our food and tropical bliss, but we also have a thriving economy that has been built on the backs of our forefathers. But as we know now, we have a very diversified economy that stands as one of the best performing economies in the region coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have one of the highest levels of income per capita. We are ranked among the first or the highest echelon within the Human Development Index. And if you look at science and technology and innovation, the CAFL campus leads the way in relation to innovation here in Barbados and here in the West Indies. I should also note that Barbados places high importance on our education and our people. Indeed, free education to our citizens has been the hallmark of the growth of the Barbadian economy, from primary right through to tertiary level. Indeed, I am a beneficiary of that free education from primary to tertiary level, and I was educated right here at the CAFL campus. Many graduates at the tertiary level have in fact gone on to become political leaders, economists, business people, educators who have continued to contribute to the development of not only Barbados, but the Caribbean and the world as a whole. Here at the CAFL campus, we offer a wide variety of internationally recognized and accredited programs under our faculties of law, humanities and education, medical sciences, social sciences, science and technology, culture, creative and performing arts, as well as sport. I should note that this campus is in fact connected to a network of campuses throughout the region, both landed and virtual, each of which operate under the umbrella of the University of the West Indies. Our connectivity, however, does not stop there. We have numerous MOUs, agreements, and arrangements with several international universities, resulting in an array of exchange programs, dual degrees, and ongoing projects in various disciplines. We encourage you to explore the various options through which you or your children and relatives can join us here at the University of the West Indies CAFL campus. This, ladies and gentlemen, is just a snapshot of what we have to offer, and we will continue to expand upon this offering during your stay and over the next couple of years. On a more exciting note, however, we are anxious to hear from you, your experiences, knowledge, and cultural inclinations, where we are similar, where we are differ, and are eager to hear stories you are willing to share with us. You are family, and we are looking forward to connecting with you on various levels. Who knows, I may even find one of my distant cousins among this delegation here today. I'll be looking for the mole on the left cheek as well. It is our honor to be included in your very intense itinerary. I've been looking at your itinerary. I would have loved to participate in many of these events and gotten to know Barbados even better. But I'm very happy that you were able to explore so much of the island in such a short period of time. I have deliberately kept my remarks brief, however, so as not to keep you looking forward to the long itinerary we have this morning. But I just want to let you know we are so happy to have you here at the CAFL campus, and we look forward to welcoming you again in the future. Well, not too distant future, I hope. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you very much, Professor Moore, Deputy Principal. Professor Moore is an award-winning economist, a long-standing member of the campus community, and a former hard-working member of the Barbados Central Bank. And incidentally, he was the first person on campus who gave me a talk about ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. And as much as I'm into science, he had me spellbound. Thank you very much, Professor Moore. The CAFL campus has a long tradition of excellence in history and philosophy. We have produced many outstanding historians, among which is our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sohail Rebekos. And we recently published a massive text edited by the head of department, Dr. Henderson Carter, and Professor Viren Shepard. I'm certain that you would wish to consider getting a copy at some point in time. There's the bookshop at the back with lots of books on Barbados. Barbados is renowned for migration and remigration. From the immediate post-emancipation period, we have Barbadians going to Tobago and taking with them their banja. You all know what's banja? No? Banja is a term, and I see Dr. Burrows somewhere wrong, he's smiling off. Yeah, banja is a term they use for the music. And quote-unquote bad music. They also went to my home country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where they led the famous Vox Populi riots, which Professor Woodville K. Marshall, a former, or I should say Professor Emeritus, Woodville Marshall has written on the Vox Populi riots. They went to Brazil, and Dr. Frederick Aline, he calls it Millie gone to Brazil. Everybody know they went to Britain, worked in the underground and so on at the bus. And few people know they went to Liberia. I sent an invitation to this event to several colleagues across the world, and their question is, how did Barbadians get to Liberia? To answer that question, we have with us Dr. Carrie Banton, who is an associate professor of African diaspora history at the University of Arkansas in the United States of America. Dr. Banton has a BPA in public administration and, of course, a BA in history from Grambling State University. She also holds an MA in development studies, which means she and myself follow the same path, which is very interesting. And this is from the University of Ghana. More importantly, her PhD, which I've had the opportunity to read from cover to cover, has been published as a book called More Auspicious Shows: Barbadian Migration to Liberia, Blackness and the Making of the African Republic. And this book examines the movement of the 346 Barbadians to Liberia in 1865 and the impact of their relocation and legacies. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Carrie Banton as she delivers the keynote address.
Good morning, everyone. I've been told by my colleagues that it's raining cats and dogs and it's a tornado is threatening in Arkansas, so I'm so happy to be here. Most of all, I'm happy to be here in this space and just excited to be joining all of you today. Let me first of all welcome the group of dignitaries we have in our presence: Dr. Cleve Scott, lecturer in history in the Department of History and Philosophy at the University of the West Indies here at Cave Hill. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, former president of Liberia, Ambassador Lorenzo Llewellyn Witherspoon, who is the former Liberian diplomat, Professor Winston Moore, Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies here at Cave Hill, distinguished speakers, guests, deans and heads of departments here at the university, members of the university community, members of the Liberian delegation, and all the participants here in the Sankofa pilgrimage to Barbados, specially invited guests, members of the media, and last but certainly not least, my own friend, Marcia Cattle, Minister of Innovation, Technology, and Industry, who knew when I was coming to Barbados as a student, researching this book and gallivanting with Marcia, that she would be here with me today as I present this address in front of her, and in her very prestigious role, very much an influence to all of us as Caribbean women, women trying to be leaders, and all of us here. I'm so very proud of her and so very overjoyed that she's here with me today. Now, I am very grateful, as I mentioned, because I knew it took a lot, especially of Ambassador Witherspoon organizing this, this event, right? And all the people who have taken the lead to facilitate this very necessary conversation and relationship that this migration that happened so long ago is facilitating. What I'm going to be talking about today is my first book. I'm trying to give an overview of it, the story it tells, the arguments that I try to put forward, the kinds of theoretical interventions that it makes into ideas about colonization, freedom, emancipation, race, diaspora, blackness, right? And my approach to this book, to look at this Barbadian migration and its vital role in the transformation of the Liberian nation, was to think about the 1860s, by which time the Caribbean was 30 years post-emancipation. The United States was in the throes of civil war. Liberia had become home to numerous groups of black migrants while fighting off claims by the French and the British. By the turn of the century, where we have the scramble for Africa, Liberia then was the only independent black republic in Africa. So I tried to include all of those kind of, large illuminating events. But let me first start by kind of telling you a little bit about how I, a Jamaican, came to be writing about Barbados. I know that's kind of a little bit sacrilegious maybe in our Caribbean circles, right? Jamaican and Barbadians are kind of like the big powerhouse in terms of history. We know that Barbados was kind of the place from which empire was built, and much of how we understand British imperialism and colonialism and slavery, and then Jamaica with King Sugar and all of that too. So Jamaicans tend to write about Jamaica and Barbadians tend to write about Barbados, right? But I came to this book at Vanderbilt University. I had gone to Vanderbilt fully intending to write about dancehall music. However, acting upon advice from my advisor, who's from Trinidad, I started to explore this old interest in diplomatic history. I had read about Haiti and all the issues that Haiti had in becoming an independent republic and negotiating its place in the world. And I thought, there's another republic across the Atlantic called Liberia. And so I was curious about how Liberia was faring in that 19th century. And it was then I discovered Gerard Ralston, a white Philadelphian colonizationist who served as Liberia's Consul General in the 19th century. I started to write about Ralston and his efforts to negotiate trade and diplomatic policies on behalf of this newly independent nation when I found a letter he wrote responding to a group of Barbadians ostensibly expressing interest in emigrating to Liberia. Now, Liberia being just next door to the British colony of Sierra Leone dramatized the Barbadians' odd interest. And so, overcome with curiosity, I found myself going down a rabbit hole. Why were colonial British Barbadian interested in migrating to Liberia instead of the British crown colony of Sierra Leone, which was right next door, right? And as historian, you need that question. And that became the question, why wouldn't the British colonial Barbadians want to go to another British space, right? And then, of course, you want to wonder what happened. Did they eventually make it there? And then what happened once they arrived? And so an even more complex and fascinating story unfolded in my subsequent research. The story I uncovered brought together West Indians and African Americans and Africans in ways that encapsulated all my academic interests and my passion as maybe a Garveyite Pan-Africanist, right? And so knowing the Liberian story, a colony created by the United States for African Americans, it then occurred to me that the Barbadian story, the Barbadian interest, did not resemble that of the other 19th century migration. And theirs neither shared the common set of tropes nor the set of narrative inevitability that we had become accustomed to. So how did they come to this interest? Now, in the 1840s, Anthony Berkeley, who became the leader of this movement, had suffered years of failure in advocating for post-slavery reforms in Barbados before he even considered leaving. He had hoped to convince the British monarchy that he and other members of his class were loyal subjects who were fit and deserving of their rights. And in the midst of increasing white backlash against post-emancipation reforms, we had an anonymous writer working under the pen name Africanus. How suitable. And he wrote a letter to the editor of The Liberal, a local newspaper, to suggest that Afro-Barbadians should broaden their horizons. You heard all the places that they had gone to, Brazil and Trinidad and Demerara and St. Croix, that they should broaden their horizons. The mysterious Africanus might have even been Berkeley himself. When he posed this question, it probably even outed him. He said, if political equality is denied to us in that land which gave birth to us, by whom the power is bestowed, how are we to obtain it? On the one hand, Africanus suggested that Afro-Barbadians should fight their way, quote, as the braver spirits among us are doing, I think referring to Samuel Prescott and other political fighters. But in another breath, he demanded that Barbadians seek it, quote, on other and more auspicious shores, leaving behind the land of our birth, that land which is dear to our hearts, to be tilled by the tyrants who claim it as their own. And as Africanus, refrain of finding the more auspicious shores animated post-slavery life, it increasingly functioned to reset the limits of freedom, the imagination of freedom, and the desires, the limited desires that it had placed upon the horizons of Barbadians and people like Berkeley. And so reacting to this post-emancipation discontent and filled with determination to fulfill his dreams, Berkeley set his sights directly across the ocean to Liberia. And though Liberia was on a distant shore, it felt much closer to Barbadians. As we know, Barbados is right there out in the Atlantic. Right? And so the Atlantic, that once shark-filled gulf that had swallowed up the bodies of chained Africans, did not appear as horrifying as to render a chancing a crossing foolish. With the abolition of slavery and the emergence of Liberia as a possible alternative, the ocean then became a bridge, drawing together two shorelines, united by sheer concerns about the future of blackness. But this was not just filled in by imagination, shaped by concerns. Black newspapers exchanging information from the Caribbean to the United States to Liberia recreated relationships. Their desires in Barbados were also defined by real experiences. J.J. Roberts, an African-American president, visited Barbados in 1848. And African-Americans en route to Liberia stopped over in Barbados to spectacle of crowds. So staring across the vast ocean filled Berkeley with the belief that he too could one day become the governor of a Negro republic. And so the realization that his dreams of immigration could not be achieved without foreign aid brought the Barbadians to the American Colonization Society, the very organization in the United States that had created Liberia as a colony for African Americans. So here we have Berkeley seeking funding for his trip, writing a very eloquent letter to the American Colonization Society, highlighting that the Barbadians were, quote, desirous of immigrating to Liberia for a twofold reason, and this is the clicker right here. What were the reasons? One being the improvement of their condition by diligent labor, and two, the noble desire of assisting to elevate their fatherland or building up a nationality without which they consider their race can never attain their proper position in the family of nations. Barbadians, in their efforts to emigrate to the West African Republic, expressed desires to exert control over their own labor, to reap the reward of their own labor, the fruits of their own labor, and to also to participate in a nation-building project which would demonstrate their qualifications for citizenship. So in doing so, they were discursively creating an inextricable link between their body, their labor, and the Liberian nation. And newspapers all across the diaspora started to write about this Barbadian interest. People had heard about the industrious nature of Barbadians far and wide. And so in 1851, this interest of the British West Indians captured the Baltimore Sun editor, who reprinted the views of a West Indian native, quote, "Can we not endorse the words of the British Review and say, quote, the Americans are successfully planting free Negroes on the coast of Africa, a greater event, probably in its consequences, than any that has occurred since Columbus set sail for the New World." The writer made it known that the West Indians will emigrate to Liberia. They will crowd your steamers. They will take with them intelligence, wealth, and a perfect knowledge at once of the agriculture of the country. They will clothe the hillside and the valley with fields upon fields of sugarcane, a plant indigenous to Africa and where it grows almost luxuriantly. And so, according to this editor, the West Indian native had also described the various burdens and vexations still imposed upon Africans in the West Indies, and remarks that thousands of families are sighing for the vastly superior privileges of the young republic of the Western Africa. So now the Barbadians have written their letter. They have gotten the funding. The Brig Corps arrives, and they take their seat on board. It takes 34 days of travel. Of course, sighting the African coast would have given the Barbadians some reason to look towards their future. Looking at that coastline rising to meet their arrival in the Brig Corps, leaving behind the post-emancipation troubles of the Caribbean, leaving it to fall away, and looking forward to new frontiers of freedom and their desires of a better life. One passenger, John Padmore, bitterly complained that we would have reached here sooner, but we were met with nearly 8 days of calm. And so by May 10th, 1865, One Liberian reporter celebrated the successful journey of the brig Cora, noting that all who left Barbados in her reached Africa alive. There was not a single death on board the passage. Upon arrival, Barclay and the other Barbadians joined a broad cross-section of black migrants who had arrived in Liberia under varying conditions of unfreedom as a result of overlapping yet different socio-political and economic forces within the Atlantic world. This included African Americans, African recaptives who were Africans liberated from slave ships, and African indigenes of about 16 various ethnicities. And so with the Barbadian arrival, 4 groups with different experiences of oppression and brutality shaping their arrival and their path to Liberia met to envision a common future. West Indians, African Americans, African recaptives, and indigenous Liberians collided in a Liberian nation-building project, making the West African coast a black multicultural spaces. I call it a Negropolis, right? An Afropolitan space, the New York of the 19th century, if you will, right? A space of multiple voices and visions. No, the Barbadians' arrival proved especially momentous. But if they found their unusual social environment to be worrisome, their ambiguous political status created even more alarm. The Barbadian cohort arrived in a Liberian republic where African-American migrants turned Americo-Liberians control the politics. The Americo-Liberian Joseph Jenkins Roberts, a migrant from Virginia who had served as Liberia's first president, anxiously observed the 1865 arrival of the 346 Barbadians. Quote, "Heretofore, we have now and then a family or two to arrive from the British West Indies, but nearly all, after a while, make a visit to Sierra Leone, and in most cases finally settle there where the manners and customs of the people are more English, and of course more adapted to their early habits and taste." Perhaps Roberts' conscious hostility to the migrants' non-Republican political ideology was rooted in the agitation of British encroachment evoked by the West Indians' presence. By politically distinguishing the West Indians from their African-American counterparts, Roberts admitted that their different political legacy would disrupt the communalism that Liberia had forged through a black racial identity. Roberts suggested that the Barbadian migrants might have inherited and carried a fidelity to the British monarchy that migration had not extinguished, and thus might prove disruptive to the black Republican experiment. With an acute awareness of the political implications of the Barbadians' presence, the former president set aside his fears as he attempted to remain optimistic. Roberts hoped that as the largest group of West Indians that have settled in the Republic, that, quote, "perhaps this company, being a large number and forming themselves into a neighborhood, as I understand, they propose settling pretty much together between the St. Paul's and Carisburg, would keep them in Liberia." But Roberts also sensed that the Barbadians' political dislocation in Republican Liberia and understood the implications for the migrants and the state. As such, he prayed that they would, quote, "gradually slide into our Republican feelings and sentiments and soon find themselves entirely identified with this country. If so, and I think most likely, these people with the blessings of Providence will doubtless prove a great acquisition to Liberia. And in the process, what had been previously considered crucial distinctions between different forms of government were deliberately papered over, even as it continued to generate tensions." Now, as they had done in every other turn in their lives thus far, the Barbadians were going to have to learn to adjust. In Liberia, this began with the establishment of their settlement, a ritual of arrival and encounter that every migrant had to endure in Liberia, the prospect of land on which to build their homes, to better themselves, and to help forge a successful black nation had partially enticed Barbadians to migrate to Liberia. And so, as was customary, the Barbadians were allotted land on which to create their own distinct community. In a letter to relatives back home, John Padmore outlined, quote, "The president has directed that our lands of 25 acres shall be laid off on Monday the 16th on Carrisburg Road, which is the best locality for us." The Barbadians now had land, a commodity that had been scarce and beyond their reach in post-emancipation Barbados. Liberian officials knew that land would give Barbadians a stake in the nation and that it would be an important link to their freedom and citizenship. By acquiring their land and fulfilling one of their dreams of emancipation, the Barbadians began to fashion themselves as Liberians, building their homes and remaking themselves into commercial and subsistent farmers. The American Colonization Society exercised an essential feature by naming the Barbadian settlement Crozerville after Samuel and John P. Crozer, Philadelphia colonizationists who had accompanied the first group of immigrants. Now, when we do the return trip to Liberia, you will eventually make your way to Crozerville, right, which is located a little bit upcountry. You would have seen last night in Shireen's film, right, on the St. Paul's River, sitting close to approximately 2,000 ethnic villages in central Liberia, in the northwest, and in the coastal region near Monrovia. And in that area, they joined a group of semi-skilled African-American settlers who had been freed on the express condition that they be repatriated to Liberia. Also African captives who had settled nearby in Clay Ashland. And altogether, those who lived in the settlement alongside the St. Paul's River engaged in farming, supplying food to the urban coastal settlements. Migrants would use their location to engage in missionary activities. And so the Barbadians would, occupy this very liminal and very tenuous space between native African and African-American settlements. And so their pattern of settlement reflected the kinds of spatial, social, and political segmentation that would later come to outline some of the issues that has transpired in Liberia. Their settlement did very much interrupt the coexistent rural, urban, and traditional modern divide that had ordered Liberian society. African-American settlements in the few interior and coastal areas of large plantations and mining activities. And so the Barbadians' placement did a lot to soften the very sharp spatial divide and the kinds of complexity and dynamics and uncertainty that had ordered Liberian society, buffering the indigenous and the other migrants, creating a kind of borderland between the different groups that had come to settle in Liberia. And so what do we understand by this, by the introduction of the Barbadian migrants and their settlement in this new space in Liberia, the kinds of imprints of diaspora that would now define the social geography of Liberia, the new racial identity, how labor would be viewed now with all the different groups of migrants, the kinds of religiosity that would be observed by onlookers. And so my takeaway here was this is a moment in the production of new realities of Blackness, right? And it was through these kinds of dynamic of who is participating through religious experience, labor, settlement in the nation building project, in which kind of new ideas about citizenship would be defined. We're also seeing the ways in which old world realities would be manifested in new world venues as Liberia became a new platform to imprint all the ideas that the migrants had about creating a nation. What is their understanding of freedom? What is their understanding of citizenship? What their understanding of building a home? So we see the the kinds of architecture that we see here in Barbados, the chattel home, the relics of some of the plantation-style housing, right, that would be kind of imprinted upon the Liberian landscape, right? So you see through the demarcation of the landscape new ways in which material cultures were moving within the Atlantic world, but also their relationship to social hierarchy, right? The inscription of settlements were also representing new identities emerging in another form, right? So we're seeing against the backdrops of clay huts and new 1- and 2-story building, stone and brick porticoed houses in the settlements, antebellum American-style plantation homes, right? So we're seeing new kinds of Western architecture being implemented in an African setting in which new codes of ethnicities are being implanted onto the African landscape. Now, national belonging was not only politically conceived, but also religiously determined. A mere 10 days after their arrival, the Barbadians commenced the building of Christ Church in their settlement of Crozeville. Reports confirm that the Barbadians, quote, have Episcopalian church in this settlement, of which Reverend A.F. Russell is the industrious and energetic pastor, and like other Liberian people, they profess to be very religious. The rich indigenous religious practices in the area were added to this. The institutions were supported by a political system that permitted new ideas of religion. Padmore, in his first letter to a friend in Barbados, noted, quote, a special service was called for us on Sunday the 14th at the parish church by Professor Crummell, which was handsomely responded to. In his sermon to the Barbadians at the Trinity Church in Monrovia, Alexander Crummell chose a passage from Deuteronomy that summed up the exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt and their final settlement in the land of Canaan. Crummell infused the Barbadians' journey with the same sense of providence. He called on persons of African ancestry around the world to actively engage in the religious, economic, and social development of the African continent. And in these kinds of performances, the larger Black populace coalesced and fragmented along religious lines. Alexander Crummell pointed out, quote, our mission is evidently to organize the native labor around us, to introduce regulating and controlling law among them, to gather their children into schools in order to train their intellect, to make these people civilized and Christian people, and to incorporate them into our republic as citizens and into the church of God as brethren. And so by these means, Crummell and other migrants were building this nationalist vision. Now, as you may have heard in the events throughout this week, that Barbadians came to occupy various proud positions in Liberia. If you look at the ship manifest, they went there with all kinds of skills. In fact, they were particularly chosen because they were the best equipped. They were the best of the best. And you can see from the ship manifest all the skills that they were going to build the Liberian Republic with. And this was evident if you look at all the various capacities that Barbadians would go on to serve in Liberia. And one of those was Arthur Barclay, right? And I want to tell you a little bit of the tea around Arthur Barclay and when he became president of Liberia. Now, Liberia was not prepared to accommodate the fullness of Blackness. At its founding in the 1820s by the American Colonization Society, the colony was attended to one group of Blacks, African Americans. However, with independence, internal pressures, and global developments, the nation progressively opened itself to others. The Black nationalist Alexander Crummell thereafter issued a call for all the Blacks in diaspora to come to Liberia. Quote, for myself, I cordially invite Barbadians, Jamaicans, Sierra Leoneans, as well as Americans to this common heritage of the Negro, as the Immigrant Commissioner of New York greet the Germans, the Italians, the Swedes, the English, and the Irish, who arrive at the port in the hundreds and the thousands, and thus every year swell the already vast population of the great Republic of America. And so with this invitation in the language of Black unity and equality, Black migrants of different backgrounds and circumstances came to view migration to Liberia as an escape from white supremacist and colonial oppression, and made their way there expecting to be welcomed and embraced under a national canopy of blackness. The Liberian Republic thus became a national spectacle for deeply held aspirations of the African diaspora and as prescription for their historical traumas. With the desires within and scrutiny from without, Liberia gradually came to be viewed as a state held together by blackness. But even with this racial guarantee, black nationalist migrants who had dreamt of escaping to a black Zion were haunted by the possibility of Liberia collapsing into a gaggle of fractious tribes. The piercing gaze of whites that had seemingly sealed Liberia's fate before now made the anxieties worse. And given the elevated stakes, the Republic could not accept ordinary migrants. Defining blackness at the level of the presidency required a level of exceptionality that unavoidably set in motion a revelatory process. In an editorial published in the aftermath of the 1903 presidential election, J.A. Tunin, who was a teacher in Cape Palmas, exposed the reality behind the feelings that had settled in Liberia. The next important event, quote, that shall claim the undivided attention of the entire nation is the induction into office of the newly elected president, end of quote. But then Tunin mockingly inquired, who is this man and from whence comes he to rule? It was his confident assessment that this is a query going around in the circles and claiming the attention of the most thoughtful Liberians whose interest in Liberia is most absorbing. Tunin had gathered in the chatter about the president-elect what many found newsworthy had little to do with past misdeeds or his previous appointment as head of the financial department. Indeed, what was odd was that the newly elected leader had come, quote, not from the land of our forefathers' nativity to fill the exalted post of the executive chair. And though subjection to this scrutiny and gossip, the primacy of the new president heritage highlighted the electoral expectations that indexed the terms of the Barbadian othering in Liberia. Now, Tunin was right. Up until the turn of the century, all of Liberia's leaders was of American heritage. White American colonizationists had created the colony until independence. Though all subsequent Liberian presidents had been African American migrants, the ACS maintained its hegemony in a nominally independent Liberia. And so in the aftermath of the 1903 election campaign, Arthur Barkley, a migrant from the British Caribbean colony of Barbados, who emerged as the winner, became the first variance in Liberia's then 50-year presidential history. I'm trying to wrap it up here. Now, Liberia's vulnerability under this kind of a global gaze as the long arm of white supremacists and colonial forces were extended through blacks' internalization and embodiment of some of these kinds of trauma and racial oppression, right? And so, indeed, if Liberia was going to represent the kind of blow to racial oppression, it was going to have to defeat newly coalescing power structures that were gathering at the borders, that was going up against the new nation and threatening to absorb it into the new territories of the British and French colonies in very much the same way that it had been doing other African countries. And so Arthur Barkley, as the first Barbadian elected president of Liberia, was very instrumental in playing a role in holding Liberia's independence and forging Liberia forward in that very time, in that time where all of these interests was coalescing against the young nation. Now I want to just say a few words about my new book before I close here, about where the Barbadians fit and how the Barbadians' migration is forcing us to rethink not only Caribbean history, but also African history and Atlantic world history, right? And that we have to question not just the history, but the information that makes the history, the archives, right? We have to question the inherited categories that we have been given by colonialism, by the British, by the French, by the old empires, that these are wholly insufficient in terms of thinking of ourselves and thinking of our places in the world. And so Barbadian migration unveils, but also challenges some of the consensus that has been created around Caribbean historiography, Liberian historiography, Atlantic world historiography. It disrupts the traditional historical frameworks of settler colonialism that center the arrival of certain groups in Liberia while decentering others. And of course, this is no doubt influenced by the fact that much of where the archive resides in the United States or Britain, and who writes the histories of these places, right? And so the Liberian place in Liberia, the Barbadian place in Liberia has decentered, Monrovia-centered historiography, and how we think about power in terms of writing and producing historical narratives, right? We have to question the writing and the producing of history and the different communities within which histories move, right? What would it mean, we have to ask ourselves, if we open Liberian history to more diversity, right? How should we promote discussion among different kinds of people? How should we kind of open up archives and curatorial and display practices where official narratives and records cast genealogies, narratives, and people, some to the foreground and some to the background? So we need new archives that will trouble static notions of context and singular histories and establish and interrogate the established canons and conventions and norms that sustain certain power dynamics across the globe and in our societies. So recentering other archives will highlight not only the kinds of dominant configuration of historical memory and knowledge production, but also invite us to think about how archives and discovering new ways of writing history can reveal gaps, fissures, and the incompleteness of records that would facilitate diverse understandings of the past, the present, and create new futures. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Banton. And I see Ambassador Witherspoon smiling broadly. Ambassador, excellent presentation. Dr. Carter, Professor Moore. Okay. One of the major issues Dr. Banton highlighted in our presentation was land availability in the post-emancipation period. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles often calls it a landless emancipation. And we know land became a major challenge all across the Caribbean. Indeed, these migrants to Liberia opted to move there to secure the future of themselves and their progeny. So we thank Dr. Banton for that presentation. A bit later on, we will have other presentations, and we will proceed into an open mic or a broad-based discussion. Next, we're going to have some cultural performances. All across the Caribbean, the first music we have or had was the folk. The folk evolved into calypso in most countries. In Jamaica, folk evolved into mento. And from calypso, we moved to soca, and what Professor Cowan Bess, who is a professor of popular culture on this campus, calls post-soca. We're going to firstly have a performance by Ayana Goodman. She is pursuing a Bachelor of Fine Arts in the Department of Creative and Performing Arts in the Faculty of Culture, Creative and Performing Arts. And I see the Dean present here, right up front, to make sure he's number one fan. That's good, Dean. Goodman, she would perform, first of all, Conrad, which will be followed by John Belly Mama and I Am a Bajan. And in my days as a music teacher, I sang these songs to the students, especially John Belly Mama. Please give a warm welcome to Ayana Goodman. I didn't mention a little while ago that the first new form of music in the Caribbean came from Barbados, which is spooge. Spooge came before soca. And spooge came before soca. I don't know how popular spooge is or was in Liberia, but we have had a spooge revolution or re-innovation in Barbados. And we thank, of course, Dr. Stephen Walcott for his work in the Fine Arts and Performing Arts program and making Amanda available to us. Next, we're going to have a performance from Andre Lane. Andre is a graduate of the Bachelor's in History, Master's in History, and he is currently pursuing his PhD in History, looking at steel pan in Barbados. He is a member of the Super Gladiators Calypso tent, and he goes under the sobriquet Apollo. Apollo is going to come and perform an extempo, and his extempo would be on the history of migration and remigration to Liberia. Please welcome the Apollo.
Lovely Hazel campus in my beautiful island, Barbados. I really want to say to you, it is special to meet each and every one of you. I will make this up as I go along, and I hope that you will enjoy this song. Shambamire. Welcome again to everybody. I hope you can see and hear me. You're listening to the voice of Apollo, and there are some things I want you to know. We have been visiting from Africa, our brothers and sisters from Liberia. So I would like you to join me and say, welcome to Barbados, please enjoy your stay. Shamabanda, Lambambide. What else can I say of Liberia? A beautiful land in West Africa with connections here in Barbados. I will tell you more if you listen close. They had many Bajan leaders down there, like the 15th president, Arthur Barclay. So please join me again and say, welcome to Barbados, please enjoy your stay. Ba-da-da-da, la-ba-da-da. 50 Barbadians left Barbados 1865. Yes, it was a must. I meant 346 Bajans sought greener pastures in Liberia's lands. And I am very happy to share with you, they have been very successful too. So please join me once again and say, welcome home. Please enjoy your stay. I have to say something about Sankofa. Ain't mentioned Sankofa yet. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling one, I ain't saying nothing yet about Sankofa. the name of this lovely pilgrimage from my family from Crozierville village. But it would definitely be remiss of me if I didn't say the idea came from my PM Motley. And I am so happy now to say I met all of you in Barbados today. Hey! Extimpo from the voice of Apollo. Long live Kaiso. Thank you so much for coming to Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apollo. Stop the music, play the music, man. Play the music. Ladies and gentlemen, as Max Fingal would say, you don't know, the next performer is the break or intermission. I'm of the first part of the show. Intermission, break. You could go in the back, the drinks, books, etc. on display. If you need the washroom, the ushers would show you where the washrooms are.